Statements. There are exactly 7 things you can say that cause a narcissistic person to retreat from you, as though you've just held up something they cannot tolerate. Statements. The power of these statements has nothing to do with cruelty or insults. Their strength comes from one simple fact: they are grounded in reality. Statements. And above all else, narcissistic personalities are terrified of reality. This needs to be said plainly. Statements. Most people fail miserably when they try to confront someone like this. The reason isn't a lack of intelligence or courage. Statements. It's because they walk straight into a battlefield designed by the narcissist, using tools that don't just fail. Statements, but actually empower the very person they're trying to stand up to. You bring empathy, fairness, emotional honesty, and a desire for resolution. Statements. In a healthy relationship, those qualities create connection. In this dynamic, they become leverage. They are used against you. Statements. You're trying to negotiate with a hurricane and wondering why you're exhausted afterward. Statements. The fundamental error is believing you're having a mutual exchange when you're actually inside a psychological power struggle. Statements. The narcissist operates from a distorted version of reality, one where they are always the wounded hero, always misunderstood, always central. Statements. In that story, you are assigned the role of the flawed side character, responsible for fixing, accommodating, and absorbing blame. Statements. Every emotional reaction you offer, whether it's anger, sadness, or pleading, is proof that you've accepted their version of the world. Statements. You're playing by their rules, and within that system, they always win. Real power begins the moment you stop impulsively reacting and begin deliberately responding. A reaction is automatic. It's loud, rushed. Statements, and fueled by emotion. A response is intentional. It's measured. It's calm. Statements. It's the decision to stop using their map entirely and instead stand firmly in what you know to be true. This is where words become transformative. Statements. Not as weapons meant to wound, but as tools used to reinforce reality. You're not trying to tear down their fantasy. Statements. You're simply refusing to live inside it. To understand why this works so deeply, you have to understand what truly drives narcissistic behavior. Statements. Beneath the grandiosity, beneath the self-congratulation and dominance, there is one core fear. It isn't your anger. It isn't your reasoning. It's exposure. Their identity is a fragile structure built layer by painful layer to protect against overwhelming shame and a sense of not being enough. Statements. The confident exterior is armor. The charm is camouflage. None of it exists without constant reinforcement. This does not excuse the harm they cause. Statement explains the mechanics behind it. Their greatest dread is being clearly seen, not admired, not feared. Seen. Statements. They live in constant vigilance that someone might notice the cracks, might glimpse the insecurity they work so hard to bury. That's why certain phrases, statements, when spoken without emotion or hostility, land so powerfully. These words don't attack them. They illuminate them. They function like a mirror held steady. Statements. And what reflects back is not the image of superiority they depend on, but the outline of the truth they've been running from. Statements. This is shame at its deepest level. They are not afraid you will hurt them. They are afraid you will recognize them. Statements. And recognition threatens the illusion that sustains them. Pause here for a moment and reflect. Have you ever said something unexpectedly simple to a difficult person and watched the tension dissolve instantly? You weren't trying to win. Statements. You were tired. You spoke plainly. And suddenly, the drama stopped. That wasn't accidental. There is a psychological principle at work. Statements. Consider how you said it and what changed afterward. Many people discover this instinctively without realizing why it works. Statements. This is the foundation of verbal boundaries. And let's be very clear about this. Speaking a boundary is not aggression. Statements. Aggression is about dominance and control. Truthful assertion is about self-regulation. Statements. It's the decision to no longer allow someone else to define your reality. Think of it as standing firmly on your own property. Statements. You're not invading anyone else's space. You're simply stating calmly and clearly where you stand. The words themselves matter. Statements. But how you deliver them matters even more. A boundary shouted in frustration is not a boundary at all. Statements. It's a signal that you're still emotionally entangled. And that invitation will always be accepted by someone who thrives on chaos. Statements. But a boundary stated with steady calm, with the neutrality of a fact that doesn't need defending, disrupts the entire interaction. It breaks the pattern statements. It introduces a logic their system cannot process. Your composure reflects their instability back to them, and that reflection is intolerable statements. When you master this, the shift that follows is profound. This isn't just about handling a toxic relationship statements. It's about a deeper transformation within you. The respect you begin to receive isn't granted by others. It emerges naturally from how you carry yourself statements. You stop functioning as a piece on their chessboard because you've chosen to step away from the game entirely. Statements. You move from being written into their narrative to reclaiming authorship over your own life. That is real strength. Statements. Here's a truth that can feel uncomfortable at first. Narcissistic individuals don't target you because you're weak. Statements. They target you because they sense something in you they desperately crave and cannot authentically develop. Genuine self-worth, integrity, inner stability statements that terrifies them. Their behavior is not random, it is strategic. And understanding this gives you clarity, not fear statements. If this perspective resonates with you and helps you see your experiences more clearly, statements. Subscribe my channel so you don't miss the next step in learning how to protect your reality and your peace statements. What you're dealing with is not random behavior. It's a deliberate pursuit shaped by years of searching for what they themselves do not possess. Think of a seasoned hunter rather than a reckless attacker. They don't rush, they watch, they assess, they look closely for a specific mix of qualities. Statements. Surprisingly, they are rarely drawn to those who appear fragile or powerless. Instead, they are magnetized by people who carry energy, depth statements, and vitality because that is where the greatest psychological payoff exists. So what is it about you that captures their attention so strongly? Statements. Above all else, it's your emotional depth, your ability to feel compassion, to understand nuance, to give people the benefit of the doubt. Statements. This is something they do not truly experience, but they are highly skilled at using it. They don't see empathy as a virtue. They see it as an opening. Statements. A doorway they can quietly walk through. Then there is your capability. You are effective. You follow through. You have self-discipline and produce results. Statements. That competence represents something they desperately want to associate with themselves. It becomes fuel for their false sense of importance. Statements. And layered on top of that is your moral compass. Your honesty, your desire to do what is right even when no one is watching. Statements. Because you operate with integrity, you assume others do too. You struggle to imagine someone acting without a conscience. Ironically, statements. This strength becomes the very vulnerability they exploit. This is the cruel paradox of these dynamics. The light you carry attracts what feeds on it. Statements. They recognize your wholeness, your genuine ability to care and create, and that recognition sparks both envy and hostility. If they cannot absorb it, statements, they try to dismantle it simply so it no longer reminds them of the emptiness they work so hard to hide. Once they identify you, statements, the process doesn't start with obvious cruelty. It begins quietly. Small tests, subtle intrusions. Statements. Psychological feelers designed to see how much resistance they will encounter. Maybe it's a comment that sounds like praise but stings slightly. Statements. Maybe it's a promise casually forgotten. Maybe it's a joke made at your expense. Statements. Sharp enough to hurt but delivered playfully enough that objecting makes you seem difficult. Each moment is a trial run. Statements. They are silently asking whether you will tolerate it. Your response becomes their data. If you brush it off, rationalize their behavior, statements, or prioritize peace over discomfort, you've unknowingly handed them a map of your boundaries. And once they have that map, they begin pushing further. Statements. The missed commitment turns into repeated unreliability. The joke becomes public embarrassment. Step by step, your personal space shrinks. Statements. This is where the difference between normal conflict and manipulative behavior becomes clear. In healthy relationships, tension arises and gets addressed. Statements. There is repair. There is mutual accountability. Here, there is no repair. There is strategy. Statements. A slow erosion of your standards until you find yourself tolerating treatment you once would have rejected instantly. The progression is gradual by design. Statements. It begins with something minor, something easy to excuse. You feel uneasy, but you tell yourself it's not worth addressing. You don't want to seem dramatic statements, but the moment you accept it, that behavior becomes the new baseline. The next violation stretches a little further, and then further still. This pattern reinforces their distorted worldview. In their mind, they are entitled, and your silence becomes agreement. Each time you don't push back statements, the line moves. And what makes this especially dangerous is how adaptable the human mind is. What once felt unacceptable slowly starts to feel normal statements. Hypervigilance becomes routine. Monitoring their moods becomes second nature. You forget what it felt like to exist without tension statements. The abnormal becomes familiar. Why does this happen so often to kind, thoughtful people? Because your internal wiring works against you here. Statements. You value harmony. You look for explanations. You assume good intent. You project your own decency onto someone who does not share it. Statements. You tell yourself they didn't mean it, that they're stressed, that you're misunderstanding. Statements. Admitting that someone is intentionally dismantling your sense of self is painful, so your mind resists it. This opens the door to deep self-doubt. Statements. You begin questioning your perception. You wonder if you're being overly sensitive or dramatic. And this is the most effective manipulation of all statements, shifting the focus from their behavior to your reaction. Slowly, you stop trusting yourself. But eventually something breaks through. A moment so clear, statements, so unmistakable that the confusion collapses. The accumulated weight of all the small violations becomes impossible to ignore. And in that moment of clarity, you realize the change cannot come from them. It must come from you. What follows are not attacks. Statements, they are statements of reality. They are not designed to wound, but to ground. And for someone who thrives on distortion, clarity is profoundly threatening. Statements. Saying that you recognize what they're doing is powerful because it removes their camouflage. Their tactics rely on deniability, on plausible innocence. Statements. When you calmly state that you see the pattern, you don't need to explain or defend yourself. The awareness alone dismantles the game. Statements. It tells them you are no longer lost in confusion, and that shift alone alters the power dynamic. Statements. Refusing responsibility for what is not yours is another essential boundary. They habitually offload their failures, emotions, and chaos onto others. Statements. When you decline to carry that weight, you are not being cruel. You are restoring balance. Statements. There is a critical difference between supporting someone and enabling dysfunction. Letting them face the consequences of their choices is not abandonment. Statements. It is reality. And when you state that you will not accept being spoken to with disrespect, you are not negotiating. You are defining a standard. Delivered calmly, without anger, it closes the door to escalation. Anger invites debate. Calm certainty ends it. A boundary does not require justification. Statements. It simply exists. Finally, refusing to manage their emotional reactions is essential. Their outbursts, sulking, and dramatics are tools, not expressions. Statements. When you stop responding to them as emergencies, their leverage disappears. This work is not easy, but it is freeing. If this clarity resonates with you and helps you reclaim your ground, statements. Subscribe my channel so you can continue strengthening your sense of self and boundaries. Statements. They slowly condition you to believe that their emotional balance is somehow your responsibility. That belief is the hook. Statements. Breaking it requires a clear declaration of emotional autonomy. When you step into that truth, you are affirming that you are a grown individual. Statements. Fully capable of managing your own inner world, and that their emotional reactions belong to them alone. This can feel brutally uncomfortable at first. Statements. Because emotionally healthy people are wired to care about how others feel. Statements. But caring does not mean sacrificing yourself to regulate another adult's emotional storms. By stepping back, you are not being cruel. Statements. You are returning ownership of their feelings to where it belongs. You are no longer allowing your empathy to be used as leverage. Statements. When you stop engaging in their emotional theatrics, they are forced to sit with their own discomfort instead of outsourcing it onto you. Statements. That single shift dismantles one of their most reliable control tactics. There comes a point where another line must be drawn. Statements. Refusing to explain yourself endlessly is not avoidance, it is self-respect. Statements. Many people find themselves trapped in exhausting debates where they are pressured to justify their thoughts, choices, and even their identity. Statements. This is not accidental, it is a carefully constructed trap. The dynamic is set up so they interrogate and you defend. Statements. Each explanation you offer becomes raw material they can twist, distort, and weaponize against you later. Statements. The argument never resolves because resolution is not the goal. Control is. When you over-explain statements, you silently communicate that their approval is required for your life to make sense. Statements. Declining to justify yourself is a refusal to step into that courtroom. It is you reclaiming authority over your own decisions. Statements. Your life does not require their endorsement. Statements. Standing firmly in your choices without seeking permission is one of the most destabilizing things you can do to someone who thrives on dominance. Statements. There are moments when disengagement becomes essential. Some conversations are not conversations at all. They are circular statements, draining performances meant to confuse and overpower rather than connect. You are not obligated to stay present in exchanges designed to exhaust you. Statements. Declaring that the interaction has ended and then physically removing yourself by leaving the room or ending the call is a boundary backed by action. Statements. It communicates that your time and mental clarity are valuable and not available for manipulation. Statements. Boundaries spoken without follow-through invite challenge. Boundaries enforced through behavior send a message that does not require repetition. Statements. Another deeply unsettling truth for them is your indifference to their judgment. Statements. The entire narcissistic dynamic depends on their role as evaluator and your role as the one seeking approval. Their influence exists only if you care what they think. Their praise and criticism are the currency through which they maintain power. Statements. When you calmly state that their opinion of you holds no weight, you dismantle the entire system. This is not said in anger. Statements. It emerges from genuine self-validation. It reflects an internal knowing of who you are, guided by your own values rather than their assessments. Statements. At that moment, you stop using them as a mirror. You no longer look outward to understand yourself. That is freedom in its purest form. Statements. These statements are not devastating because they are harsh statements. They are devastating because they collapse the illusion holding the narcissistic personality together. To understand why they work, statements, you have to understand the fragile psychological structure underneath. The narcissistic self is not authentic. It is a constructed identity. Statements, inflated and theatrical, built solely to extract constant admiration from others. This false persona presents as exceptional, misunderstood, superior, or uniquely victimized. But beneath it, there is no solid core. It is an empty shell that survives only through external validation. Statements. Without continuous reinforcement, it begins to crumble. That constant hunger for admiration is not simple arrogance. It is psychological necessity. Statements. Without reflection from others, the false self destabilizes, threatening to expose the emptiness it was created to conceal. Statements. That is why even mild resistance feels catastrophic to them. A boundary is not interpreted as disagreement. It is perceived as an existential threat. Statements. When you refuse to engage, you stop feeding the illusion. You become someone who no longer believes in the performance. And that disbelief is dangerous, statements, because it risks revealing to them and to the world that the image they protect is artificial. Statements. This is where the distinction between genuine confidence and pathological grandiosity becomes clear. Healthy self-worth is internally generated. Statements. It grows from experience, competence, and self-awareness. Grandiosity, on the other hand, is externally dependent. It is brittle, reactive statements, and entirely reliant on how others respond. Your calm, grounded words do not attack their strength. They expose the absence of it. Hidden beneath the elaborate facade is something far more painful, overwhelming, unresolved shame. Statements. At the core is a belief of deep inadequacy and worthlessness. This is the wound their entire personality is organized around avoiding. Everything, the dominance, the manipulation, the superiority, is an elaborate escape route from that terror. Statements. The tools you use against manipulation are effective because they bypass the surface defenses and touch that buried truth. When you reject blame, statements. they are confronted with their own accountability. When you stop managing their emotions, they face their internal chaos. Statements. When you disengage from their judgment, you reveal how little authority they truly possess. This exposure triggers intense psychological distress. Statements. Being seen accurately, not as the grand figure they project, but as the flawed person they fear they are, is intolerable. Statements. Their defenses exist to prevent that moment. Statements. Your clarity punctures the disguise and forces them toward the very reality they spend their lives running from. Statements. Control in narcissistic relationships is maintained through confusion. Circular conversations, word salad, and emotional distortion are not accidents. Statements. They are strategies designed to destabilize your perception of reality. When you are confused, they lead. When clarity disappears, statements. They define the narrative. Clear, firm language is the antidote. Direct statements and the fog. They reject mental gymnastics. Statements. They anchor you in reality and deny entry into chaos. Once you stop participating, their power evaporates. Their tactics only work if you play along. There is another psychological shift that occurs when you respond to manipulation with calm steadiness. Narcissists rely heavily on projection. Statements, offloading their own rage, dishonesty, and insecurity onto others. They accuse you of what they are doing to avoid facing themselves. Statements. When you respond with grounded truth, you interrupt that process. You do not accept the projection. Instead, you reflect it back. Statements. Your composure highlights their instability. Your consistency exposes their contradictions. For a brief and deeply unsettling moment. Statements. They are forced to see themselves clearly. That moment is unbearable for them. Statements. Sitting with their own disorder without using you as a dumping ground creates distress they are not equipped to manage. This is not just emotional conflict. Statements. It produces measurable psychological impact, and the more consistently you remain calm, clear, and disengaged. Statements. The less effective their manipulation becomes. If this perspective helps you reclaim your clarity and peace. Statements. Subscribe my channel and continue learning how to protect your emotional well-being and rebuild your sense of self.